for any new webinar participants. Valerie, why don't you go ahead there?
Okay, for any first-time participants, we're going to tell you a little bit about ourselves. Lucinda's experience in affordable housing policy, advocacy, and communications. She started her own consulting practice 5 years ago, focused on grant writing and communications.
And Valerie has owned Robinson et al. Marketing and Public Relations for more than 20 years. She offers communication services to clients in the private, nonprofit, and public sectors. And I know that's our introduction that we do every time, but if we realize we may have some people joining us for the first time. And so we just want to say that this is a series of webinars. They're really designed to be an information resource for the development community writ large in New Orleans. Those firms that are larger and smaller and newer and more experienced. And it's part of Finance New Orleans' commitment to really be a development community resource. And so, Valerie, you want to start talking about this?
So today's session is about demystifying zoning and permitting processes for New Orleans developers. If any of you have tried to work through it on your own, you know that there are a lot of pitfalls and a lot of process, but particularly for those of you who are kind of new to the development game, our speaker is here to offer some from the field perspective from an experienced practitioner. We do want to leave time at the end for questions. So anytime throughout the presentation, just put something in chat and we'll get to them by the end of the meeting. And now Lucinda's going to introduce our speaker for today.
Okay. We are very pleased to have Nicole Weber with us today. She is the CEO, founder, and lead consultant of Weber Consulting, which is a client advocacy firm that specializes in permitting construction, temporary, and business, and represents and advises clients in zoning matters, land use and transportation planning, historic district compliance, tax credits, and much more. So she knows her stuff. And this is kind of a part of, I think we're going to do several this year from the field sessions where we kind of bring in the perspective of folks who are out there actually doing the work and what they're finding and tips that they can pass on to others. So Valerie, since 2003, she's been working on things like creating legislation, and she's led redevelopment and development projects. She had 16 years in city government and the legal field. She's an attorney representing business owners, government agencies, educational institutions, and real estate developers, and helping folks to navigate local and state government agencies. She's a general contractor. She earned that license in 2017 and started Weber Construction in 2019. She's been, has many recognitions. Biz New Orleans as a 2017 top 10 influencer, City Businesswoman of the Year, and she was New Orleans Magazine top female achiever in 2016. And some of you may remember that she was featured on CNBC's The Deed with Sydney Torres, where she was working through as she was doing her development Bakery Village. And today's webinar, as we have been doing in our format, Nicole's going to do a presentation for about 15 minutes or so, and then we're going to launch into some conversation on this end with some Q&A, and then bring in the questions from the audience. So with that, I will turn it over to Nicole.
Well, before I'm sorry, I was going to ask you a couple of questions before we started. We kind of set the stage for your presentation. I know you're here today to bring some clarity to navigating zoning and regulation issues and the permitting process. So what would you just generally say to folks to make the whole process a little less intimidating?
I would say that that it is complicated. However, if you have someone that can walk you through the process, or if you've done the process, it's kind of like riding a bicycle. Once you get used to it, you learn very quickly how to navigate and who to talk to. and what experts you need. So a lot of times people, when they go through their first, let's say they're going through a zoning change, their first time is quite scary. They don't know what to expect. However, once you get through it, your second, third time become a little bit easier. So it's always a challenging process, but it's one that, once you've gotten so far, you learn very quickly that to expect the unexpected, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and once it's like you said, I mean, once you start, the next time it's not as difficult because you kind of know what you need to do, and it becomes a little easier. Okay, well, thank you, Nicole. We're going to turn it over to you for your PowerPoint presentation.
Great. So, welcome everyone. Just a little bit about what we do. That was a nice intro. Thank you, Lucinda and Valerie, and thank you, Finance New Orleans, for this opportunity. And thank you, everyone who have joined and are participating in the seminar. Zoning and permitting is something that it's not a very interesting topic. Pre-pandemic, if I went to a dinner party, not many people wanted to hear about what I do and what we do here at Weber Consulting. However, when you need it, you really need it, and then you're all ears. So it's something that it's good to know a little bit about, and it's also good to know who to talk to about it. Because if you ever get in a situation where you need some type of entitlement work or you need some type of waiver, then you're scrambling trying to figure things out. So it's one of those necessary items that it's good to know generally about it, especially if you're in development, you're a business owner, any type of work where you're required to get city approval, local approval, state approval. This zoning and permitting is necessary. Any type of business you may own, you need an occupational license. So when I start talking about it, then people quickly relate and soon understand a little bit about what we do. So we're a community and government relations firm, like what we talked about. The regulatory compliance, land use planning, zoning, and then we also work with real estate developers to provide options. A lot of our clients will come to us and say, I have a project that I want to do, and they may have a specific location in mind, or they may be open to suggestions of different neighborhoods or areas that they could go into. And so we'll help them plan that and do strategic planning with that. We also specialize in mixed income and affordable housing. It's something that we hold very dear. In 2020, our firm alone permitted over 700 affordable units just in the city of New Orleans. So adaptive reuse of existing buildings and also new construction and quality construction. Like we talked about, the historic district compliance, commercial and residential entitlements. We have everything from mom and pop stores to someone who needs to put in a driveway at their home. Historic tax credits and restoration tax abatements. We also specialize in tax incentives to help you along with your development. And then just the permitting and licensing, occupational license. We do a lot of hotels and restaurants as well. So just an overview for zoning. I kind of touched on it. Zoning is basically what you need to know about what you can do with a specific piece of property. A lot of times when somebody is trying to, let's say, reuse a building and do adaptive reuse, it may have been at school at some point. Now they want to turn it into residential homes. Well, that would require some type of waiver or some type of approval through city planning or the Board of Zoning Adjustments, specifically in the city of New Orleans, and then most likely would have to go on to the city council. How to find your property. I mean, there's many ways you can find property, whether it's through a real estate broker or agent, or just driving around town and finding property, or it might be property that you already have that you're looking to develop further and make it income producing. So the nuts and bolts of zoning and permitting is something I'll be talking about, current tools, future tools, and then how to get your project approved. So why is zoning so important? Zoning not only puts into place standards for what a use may be, but it also calls for design regulations. A good example is a lot of developments that we saw maybe in the 60s and the 70s where zoning was a little bit more relaxed. There's taller buildings and they may have taller signs. There may not be landscaping. And so in the 80s and 90s and current century, the design regulations have caught on because I think cities and municipalities have found value in having certain regulations, not just on the use, but also on what a development is going to look like, whether it's commercial or residential. Licensing and permitting. Licensing and permitting, this is all tied to zoning. It's what you can and cannot do. So if you want to, let's say, get an occupational license for an auto body shop, well, then you would have to have the zoning at that property that is an agreement with the type of licensing you're trying to get. As well as if you're doing any type of construction, well, your construction is going to have to fall in place with what the use would be and what's allowed under the zoning. So zoning is basically the end all be all. How to find your property. There's, whether you're looking at commercial, residential, multifamily units, vacant properties, if you find a piece of property that you want to look at, or you own a piece of property that you want to see what you can do, there's a great resource. If your property is in Orleans Parish in the city of New Orleans, it's the Property Viewer, and that's located at NOLA.gov. And I'll get you the exact website address. But if you just type in Google City of New Orleans Property Viewer, the link is definitely going to pop up. And this way, you put in the address. Or you put in, you can zoom into a certain area or neighborhood and you can see what the zoning allows. At the bottom of the screen, when you select that property, it will tell you what the zoning is. It will tell you if it's got any design regulations like an overlay district. It will tell you if it's in a historic district, whether it's national or local. And it pretty much gives you everything you need to know about that property. And it's a great resource. And then there'll be a link where you can click on that zoning and see what are the permitted uses, and then what are the regulations in terms of if you were to build or do an addition or anything like that. It'll let you know what those the buildable area is. So it's got a link to the comprehensive zoning ordinance, which is basically, I call it the Bible for zoning in the city of New Orleans. The comprehensive zoning ordinance gives you the details of what your zoning is and what isn't allowed. In 2015, the city of New Orleans redid all the zoning maps and they redid the comprehensive zoning ordinance. So this is a fairly new system and fairly new laws. So they've tried to bring it up to current times because it hadn't been, the zoning code hadn't been amended since the 60s. So a lot of the terminology obviously has changed. What people want to see in certain residential or commercial districts has changed. So they brought that up to current times. Let's see, and I'll be talking about legal non-conforming options, especially for multifamily. We're talking about Finance New Orleans and the policies for Finance New Orleans in incentivizing affordable housing. This legal non-conforming option is very useful. If there's a piece of property that may be multifamily at one point, but let's say after Katrina, the property has remained vacant, this legal non-conforming option is one that I'll go into a little bit more and talk about future tools as well. Let's see. Oh, and then another resource, how to find property, is the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority. And they have a very good website where you can look up their available properties and do research on that. Let's see. So nuts and bolts of zoning and permitting process. City Planning Commission is where you begin. If you have, let's say, a piece of property, you've gone to the Property Viewer, you've looked up what you can do with it. Let's say it's zoned commercial and you want to build multifamily there, then you most likely in certain zoning districts could only have multifamily from the ground up, from the second floor up. So the ground floor would have to remain commercial, you would have residential on the top. And this is just an example. You would go to the City Planning Commission and they would inform you that you need what's called a conditional use. The conditional use requires the Neighborhood Participation Program, also known as the NPP. And if you hear me say NPP, then I'm referring to, to that. I try not to use too many acronyms, but it's kind of short for instead of having to say the whole program name. So you would first have to do the neighborhood participation program. That requires you to send out letters, and current COVID regulations, you do not have to hold a meeting, but prior to the pandemic, you would have to hold a neighborhood meeting and give opportunity for neighbors, property owners, or interested parties, neighborhood associations to attend and to ask questions and give their concerns. And that all has to be documented, not only the letters that you send out, but also any meetings or communication that you have. Once you've done that, then you submit that packet with your application, the neighborhood participation program application, neighborhood participation program packet, and your application for the conditional use with city planning. And this can range anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000, depending on the size of your property or the size of your lot or vacant land. Often we see design review regulations causing you or having you to have to present in front of the design advisory committee, and they will comment on your designs, which leads me into just a brief conversation about what you would need to have. Typically, you're going to have architectural plans, stamp plans, if you're doing any type of major renovation or new construction. So that would be required as part of that city planning commission. And often stormwater management is required too, and a landscaping plan. Then your application will be docketed. You'll go before the city planning commission for that conditional use that I'm using as an example. And the commission the staff will have a report and basically say if they recommend approval or if they recommend some type of amendment or change to your request or denial. And that report goes to the commission, they review it, and then they hold a public hearing. Currently, everything's being done virtually. Prior to that, you would meet at City Hall down on Perdido Street, across from the Superdome, and go before the commission and a public hearing. And then whatever that commission decides, their vote is a recommendation that moves to the city council. And the city council has a final say-so on conditional uses, text amendments, zoning changes. Anything other than minor like waivers would have to go before the city council. And then they hold a public hearing and they vote on it. And when they make that decision, that's the final decision, unless you disagree and want to appeal it. And that's a whole nother process. So the zoning and permitting process, zoning review, this is something where you can ask for the city to give you information of what your zoning is, but really that property viewer that I referred to earlier, that's probably your best bet because it's easy, it's something that you can do. You don't have to go down to City Hall or contact anyone, and you've got all that information at your fingertips. Design review is something we talked about. Plan review. Plan review is necessary anytime you are trying to get a permit. If you are trying to do any type of renovation, exterior work, like let's say in a district that has design regulations or historic district, then you would have to go through that plan review. Safety and permits is the department that issues permits and that usually oversees the plan review. We touched on a little bit about stormwater management, but this is typically required for developments over a certain size. And then we have electrical and mechanical. This falls under safety and permits as well. And to let you know about electrical and mechanical, any work that you were doing on a building or structure that has over $15,000 in either HVAC, for example, or plumbing or electrical, then requires either a mechanical engineer or electrical engineer to create plans. And then you would submit those plans with all the rest of your plans for review. So current tools, Office of Community Development. This is something that the City of New Orleans offers. It's a great resource if you're trying to find what neighborhood associations, for example, are in your neighborhood where you might be looking to do some type of development. Finance New Orleans, obviously, some really great incentive options that continue to grow. And that currently is for 10 or more units. So if you have a multifamily development that has 10 or more units and you plan to do affordable housing for a portion of those, then Finance New Orleans is where you need to go and who you need to talk to, because they have some really great financing programs. And obviously that's been discussed at previous seminars or webinars, I should say. Again, New Orleans Redevelopment Authority, they have a lot of properties that have either been like adjudicated and taken over by the city, or were given up even after Katrina. So they're a great resource too, to look for properties. Louisiana Housing Corporation, so they oversee any type of tax incentives that would go for the LIHTC, LIHTC, the income tax credits, and that is tied to affordable housing projects. And let's see, historic tax credits. Historic tax credits are awesome. This can go for your property if it's over a certain age, or if you're in a historic district or any type of special taxing or economic or cultural district, then historic tax credits are a possibility, and you may be eligible. Your property may be eligible. But again, you do have to be in a certain district. It has to be either designated a landmark or over a certain age and located within that historic district and meeting that contributing time period of the historic district. So it was built during the period of that historic district. Historic tax credits are a return, 20% return on state, if approved, on your state income tax. This is also transferable. So if your property receives historic tax credits through the state, then you can transfer and sell that. And there's many companies that handle that transaction. And then for the federal historic tax credits, it's another 20% return on your federal income tax. And that is 20% of the overall qualified expenditures for your property. So let's say you spent $100,000 renovating a historic property. You were eligible, your property was eligible for the historic tax credits. You were approved by the state and by the feds for your historic tax credits. You will get a 40% return on the overall construction costs. So it's $40,000 that you will get in income tax credits. So it's a really great program, and I highly recommend it if your property is eligible. Restoration tax abatement is another great tool. Restoration tax abatement allows you to have the property value of your improvement, so the building, to be frozen for 5 years with the possibility for commercial income producing properties with the 5-year tax abatement. So it freezes your property value for 5 years, and then you have the ability to extend it an additional 5 years if you do more improvements. So this is another program that we offer, walking our clients through, and it's another one that I highly recommend, especially with property values increasing so much. And if you're doing any type of restoration to a building, this is something that you would want to look at. And it's also available for homeowners as well, which not many people know about. So future tools, something that the City Council actually voted on yesterday is to allow for established multifamily properties that typically would have to go through that conditional use process. If it's 4 units or less, now we will have the ability to, through a review process with safety and permits, the ability to, if you have a vacant building, and let's say the underlying zoning is 2-family residential, but you've got this 4-plex that has been vacant since Katrina, you would be able to, under the new established multifamily permitted use process, to be able to show that the building is in fact 4 units prior to its vacancy. And you would be able to then put that building back into commerce and renovate it and have a 4-plex, although the underlying zoning only allows for, let's say, single family or 2-family. So this is a great option when we're talking about incentivizing and creating more affordable units in our city, because our city is made up of a lot of small lots. So when we have the ability to go in and take a building that was previously, let's say, a triplex or a 4-plex, for individuals who want to have their own home and then maybe have some income producing units in their home, or to buy a building and renovate it, this is an easy and quick way that we can get affordable units back on the market and available for our residents. So some incentives for multifamily units, and that works through the Finance New Orleans program. For 10 or more units, there's some really great incentives. There's the pilot program, the payment in lieu of taxes. So if you were thinking of doing affordable housing and you've got 10 or more units, definitely get in touch with the Finance New Orleans. Let's see, how am I doing on time? Doing great. All right. So for 10 or less units, this is something that we are currently working on with the City of New Orleans, with the administration, with city planning, and with City Council, is to create incentives for these less than 10 units for multifamily. Because like I said, there's a lot of examples of buildings, existing buildings that are already in the city, that are on smaller lots, that can accommodate over 10 units or more, but they can accommodate less than 10 units. So it would be great that, you know, we see that there's financing available for, or incentive, tax incentives for these smaller multifamily units. And then let's see, oh, just a little note. If you or anyone you know is interested in applying for a new position, a newly created position, the Department of Safety and Permits, it's on there on the NOLA.gov website, but you can go to that, and it's for Assistant Zoning Administrator. And what this job specifically is going to do is going to be someone that looks at multifamily developments that are affordable, that have been given some type of incentive through zoning, and allowed to be able to get a waiver, let's say, on parking. And because of that waiver that they were allowed to do, this individual, because it's affordable housing, this individual will then review all those applications annually and make sure that the properties are in compliance with affordable housing requirement. And that job is currently up for application. So if you know anybody, tell them to go to NOLA.gov, look for this position, and they'll be able to apply. Let's see, how to get your project approved. I would say that the most important thing to keep in mind for any type of development is to have a public benefit. If you are offering to develop a property and you need some type of approval from the City Council, because you're either doing a zoning change, a plan development, or a conditional use, if you've got some part of your project like affordable housing that offers a public benefit, you are going to have a better chance of getting approved than most projects. And the City of New Orleans, the administration, and the City Council have made it a priority to incentivize for zoning and also for financing projects that incorporate affordable housing. So it's very near and dear to our hearts. And I would say that if you're looking to get into development and you want to know what would be the best way to develop property, something that can even withstand pandemics, it would be affordable housing. Alone, just in a 3-month period in 2020, at the peak of our pandemic, when we were all having to stay at home, our office pushed through $100 million worth of construction. Majority of that was for affordable housing. So $100 million of construction costs in the City of New Orleans, projects that are currently underway, were approved during the height of the pandemic. So that says a lot about the need and the necessity, and that this can withstand something like a pandemic. So let's see, things you can do to get your project approved. I think I pretty much went through that. Have some type of public benefit, especially affordable housing, and that's going to pretty much roll out the red carpet for you. So some examples of what we've done and projects that we're very proud of is the Capo Home for the Aged. This was the former Capo School in Gentilly on Franklin Avenue, and it had remained vacant for about a decade. The developers who purchased it from the school board had to go through some pretty trying times, but got it done. And it is absolutely gorgeous. They not only renovated it using historic tax credits and restoration tax abatement, but they also were able to construct an additional building that you can see in the image on the right, the after image, an additional building to the rear to offer more units for elderly. So those over, I believe it's 65 and older, are eligible to live here, and it's also affordable housing. And I'll show you some photos. You can see the before and after, and they just did a fantastic job. Just knocked it out the ballpark. I mean, really, really great job of renovating this building and bringing it back to its original condition. And that is 80 units, 45 were part of the new construction, and it was a total construction cost of $20 million. And here's an example of Bywater Project. The site is owned by HNO, and it has been a vacant piece of land for over a decade. There were some apartments that were there previously, and then after Katrina were demolished. And we got the green light over a year ago to be able to construct, which is going to be 136 units, and it's a $38 million construction value, and that will be going up soon in Bywater. Here's another example of a not adaptive reuse, because this building was previously used for elderly, but this is another example of bringing a building that remained vacant, that's no longer in compliance with zoning because it is a 16-story building. However, we were able to use grandfather clause, also known as the legal non-conforming use standards, and bring this building back into compliance. It is 200 units, and that is going to also be for seniors. But this building is on Lake Forest Boulevard. Many of you have probably passed by it as you're driving down the I-10, wondering what that was. Well, this building is under construction, and one of the examples of a building that we had permitted in 2020. And it is going to revitalize not only that area, but also offer much needed affordable senior housing. And currently under construction is a development that we also, I guess, navigated and worked with the developers. It is called The Reveal. It's on Chef Mentor Highway. It was previously blighted, neglected apartments that had been long time vacant, and basically grown over. They were trees growing up through them, but that was all demolished and cleaned up. And now the Reveal is under construction, and that is going to be 150 units with a $42 million construction cost and permit value. And some examples of smaller developments. This is much easier to do, obviously, than 200 units. These are some examples of established multifamily that we have taken the property owner, the developers, through the process of getting approval, because the underlying zoning did not allow for multifamily, but these buildings were already existing multifamily. And so through the established multifamily process, we were able to now we're actually working through the process through City Council, because we submitted prior to the City Council approving the process for these, but for established multifamily, but now we're taking them to the end of their road, and they will be able to renovate these examples of multifamily structures that have been long vacant since Katrina, and bring those back online. And here's an example of 4th Street. This is a great property in Central City. It's a vacant lot. A client of ours basically did all the footwork, getting plans done for a 6-plex, and now it's available for sale. So if you're interested, we're not real estate agents, but the property owner, you can contact directly. So contact our office, and we can put you in touch with the property owner, because it is for sale. And I think it would be a much needed development, multifamily development. Excuse me, I said 6-plex, 9-plex, 9 units, be a much needed multifamily development that has potential for that affordable housing, and possibly some incentives, tax incentives, or zoning incentives. And that's it. Here's our contact information, and I'm going to turn it back over to Valerie and Lucinda. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. listening. If you have any questions, here's our website. You can directly message us either through our website. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn, and it is spelled Weber with an R-E. So it's an interesting way to spell it, I know. But please contact us with any of your questions. And if you have any questions that you want to ask right now, please submit that through the chat, and Valerie and Lucinda are going to be reading your questions.
Thank you, Nicole, so much. That was that I learned a lot, and I have some background in zoning as well.
I know, as a planner.
A lot from that. What?
You were a planner, so
yeah. So that was I love the stuff about the new regulations on multifamily housing, and thinking of that and those smaller, especially those smaller developments that you showed us there right at the end. Somebody, I'm thinking about one of our colleagues, somebody who may be participating here, who's on this for the first time, thinking about, doing a smaller multifamily project. Can you give any parameters about cost and time in terms of working through the process? I know it can be all over the place and get, and have, different complications, but generally speaking, any sort of general idea?
So with the new permitted established multifamily, if it meets the criteria, if the property meets the criteria, then the process is much quicker and less expensive than if you had to go through the city planning and city council conditional use process. So you would typically be looking at, if you're not expanding the footprint of the building, and you're not doing any major structural work in it, then you're basically, to have your plans is going to cost a lot less than if you had to have architectural plans, or if you had to have any type of mechanical, electrical, plumbing that exceed that $15,000. So I would say anticipate spending a few $1,000s just getting through the process, and getting some basic draftsman type plans if you don't need to have architectural plans or engineered plans. And any general parameters that really is, like I said, if you are meeting the criteria for that established multifamily, then you would be eligible to be able to go straight to safety and permits, prove that the property is an existing established multifamily, although it may be vacant, and then apply for your building permit.
That's great. And that, I asked this question as a, like you said, I have worked in the planning department. What should somebody make sure to have in place before they make a big investment? In other words, you don't want to be in a situation of making a big investment of time or money in a property and then find out you can't do what you want to do with it. So,
and we see that all the time. A lot of people come to us because they've already made the purchase, and they've already even maybe put down a deposit for rent for a particular property, and then they find out that the zoning doesn't allow for what they want to do, or they have to go through, the process of getting a conditional use or some type of waiver. And so I would say the first thing before making a big investment is go to that property viewer and look at what the zoning allows and do your research. So that is very, very important for you to make that first step.
And Nicole, you mentioned a little bit about, community buy-in and the NPP process. At what point would you need that to happen? I mean, is it a dollar value, or is it the size of the project, or is it,
So anything over 2 units would require the neighborhood participation process. If you have to get some type of waiver, conditional use, zoning change, then you would be required to have that neighborhood participation and do outreach. So send out the letters, hold meetings. If you send out letters and we still have the COVID-19 regulations for pandemic over us, and so you can't meet individually or hold a meeting, then you're required to be able to you have to provide a phone number and email address so people can contact you directly. For our clients, we usually send out those letters and do the answering questions. But community buy-in is very, very important, especially with the City Planning Commission and the City Council. They do listen to their constituents. So it is important to get out and to meet people and to communicate with them, hear their concerns, try to address their concerns as much as you can, and to really prove and to document what you've done, who you've talked to. Documentation is very important. It's not only a requirement, but also in the long run, it's going to help you out, because then you can say, well, I've talked to, 5 immediate neighbors and 3 around the corner. And that will help you when you're going before these boards or commissions and the council, to have shown your outreach and to make a true good faith effort in trying to work with the residents and property owners and interested parties.
Yeah. And if I can just add, I would say that even with besides the fact that there's a requirement, it's just a good practice. It's
yes, absolutely. I always tell
good. Yeah.
I always tell clients, when we can go to City Planning Commission and City Council and not have anyone speak in opposition, that is our ultimate goal. And not to prevent it, but that means we've done our job in addressing people's concerns, because they always say, you may be building this building or doing this development, but I've got to live next to it. So it is vital and so important to communicate and to share plans, to share information with them, and to make them feel comfortable with what you're doing, and help them understand what you're trying to do.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions in chat. It says, when you reference affordable housing incentives, does that only include Section 8, or are other programs such as Unity consider qualifying for affordable housing incentives?
So affordable housing is housing that's available to anyone that is at a certain area median income. So for that area median income, if you are at a certain percent, whether it's 80 or 60% or lower, then you could be eligible for applying for affordable housing. So it's not necessarily Section 8, it's anyone that teachers, first responders, musicians, artists, our cultural bearers, our seniors, anyone with a fixed income where they cannot afford to spend more than 30% of their annual income, then they may be, if they meet the criteria for their annual income levels, then they would be eligible to be able to have affordable housing. And most developments that we see in the CBD and other larger areas, these developers incorporate already affordable housing into their existing mixed, market rate units. So they do that because they set aside a certain amount of units for people who meet the criteria for affordable housing. But I think it's also a misconception that all affordable housing is Section 8. That's not. That's only a certain percentage of what affordable housing meets. And again, affordable housing is allowing our residents to stay in our city. As we see the property values going up, rents going up, construction costs is going up, it's going to be more and more expensive to live in the city. So affordable housing allows for developers to offer rents and to offer lowered rents so that individuals can stay in our city and still afford to live where they work and have their children go to school in Orleans Parish.
Okay. And so what size of obviously everybody's going to need a permit for doing this work, but at what point would you mentioned something about, whether you need an architect to do your plans or like that. What point do you need to have that? What kind of a development?
If you're just going into a building and doing, changing out cabinets, flooring, painting, then you do not need to have architectural plans. If you are, let's say, doing anything structural, moving walls, or in certain areas, changing the exterior, then you do need to have an architect. You need to hire an architect. And this is the thing that I see the most with some of our clients, is that they try to save money, and that's smart. Everybody wants to save money, right? Why do you want to spend money if you don't have to? But not understanding the process, they may just hire a friend of a friend who has a computer program, and they put it together, and then they quickly find out that they really do need to have a professional like an architect lead the project, put the plans together, and then also have an engineer to do structural, possibly, like I mentioned earlier, mechanical and electrical, depending on the cost, if it's over $15,000 and over. So I would say that the thing that people try to do is save money in the planning phase, and that's not where you want to save the money. You want to spend money on good plans, and you want to make sure that you have the proper plans in place. If you need stormwater management, landscaping, then you need to hire those professionals as well to do that, and not try to cut corners on the plans. It just, in the long run, in speaking from just a construction standpoint, it's also great to have your plans in place and have solid, good plans, and hire professionals who know what they're doing.
Nicole, I actually had a question from what you were talking about earlier. You mentioned the historic districts. That is information, if I'm correct, is available on the property viewer, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Lucinda, for pointing that out. Yes, so if you go to that property viewer, you put in the address, you find your property that you're looking at, it will also tell you if you're located in a local historic district or a national historic district. In local historic districts, you may, if you're located in a historic district, and they have design per jurisdiction over your design, then you would need to submit plans for any changes to the exterior. If you're in the Vieux Carré, it's a little bit more complicated. They have jurisdiction over everything to do with your plans, and that's the French Quarter. The Vieux Carré Commission oversees that. But to get back to your question, if you're located in historic districts, some historic districts only have purview over demolition, but most of them have demolition purview and as well as design, and they can basically tell you what you can and cannot do. But if you hire the right professionals who know the guidelines and know the regulations, then they'll steer you in the right direction.
And the flip side of that is that you're eligible, or you may be eligible, for historic tax credits too.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, that's one of the criteria that you would be able to meet that eligibility.
And so I would like to say too, I mean, I can't say enough about how helpful HDLC can be on the front end of a project.
Absolutely.
If you have something and you have kind of a plan, or, if you want them to come out and look at a building or anything, I mean, they're very willing to do that.
They're a great resource.
They really are. And I know people are intimidated by the fact that, they have some say over what they're going to do, but they're very nice and will guide you in the right direction so you can get your project done.
Although, it is difficult and it's time consuming. I know personally that it can be extremely time consuming, extremely expensive to go through the historic district compliance process. It is worth it in the end because you will get a better product out of it.
Okay, any other questions from anybody? We've covered the ones that were in chat. All right, well, if there aren't any other questions, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that it was helpful. We'll be holding more of these from the field sessions throughout the year. And if there's a topic that you want covered, please reach out to us and let us know. Our next webinar will be on February 26th, and that's going to be with FNO staff, who are going to kind of update us on what they've been doing, what they've learned, and including some nuts and bolts information. So I think that'll be a real interesting one because you're going to get a lot of insight into what they are doing and what they're looking for. So
I was just going to say, also remember that this is on this presentation. Nicole has put a lot of information in here. We know it's a lot. But don't get overwhelmed. It is doable. And the more you you do your homework at the beginning, the better you're going to come out in the long run. But it is doable. So don't be too intimidated by all of this. It's something that's very doable. So I guess we just wanted to say thank you. And we will see you next month, hopefully. And remember, I was also going to say this is available on the Finance New Orleans YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and look at this, kind of take it all in for a second time, that's where you can find it. It will be available online. So with that.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Finance New Orleans, again. And thank you, Valerie, Lucinda, Elizabeth, for guiding us through this process.
Well, we enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend.